Alrighty, here we go. Predictions. Season 5. Volume 2. Chapter 5, Shock Jock. By the time we reach Shock Jock, the story has already crossed the line. It can't step back over. This is the moment after containment fails. The moment after the nervous system realizes the old strategies don't work anymore. Shock Jock doesn't begin with a plan. It begins with a collapse in meaning. When Will says we failed, we never stood a chance, that's not despair, it's shock. That's the psyche registering that control is gone, that the fight worked, but only temporarily. That whatever was holding us together before is no longer enough. And you see it immediately in his body. Will kneeling among the dead soldiers isn't a victory pose. It's the aftermath of a trauma protector burning through everything it had. Enormous power, zero regulation. The system did what it had to survive. And now it's left staring at the cost of that survival. This is what fight mode looks like once the adrenaline drains out. And notice what happens. The story doesn't reward him. It doesn't crown him. It doesn't frame him as a hero. It lets him feel it. That's why Joyce sits with him on the bed and says, "This is not over." Not by a long shot. She isn't motivating him. She's grounding him. She's doing what the nervous system needs after shock. Presence without solutions. Holding without fixing. Because Shock Jock isn't about winning. It's about burning out the illusion that force alone can save you. Everywhere you look, the same pattern is playing out. Mike is standing in the upside down, not entering it, not choosing it, just suddenly inside. That's what happens when inner and outer worlds collapse into each other. The boundary is gone. There's no going back to safety. The psyche is inside the experience now. Dustin says it out loud. Everything we thought the upside down was, we were wrong. That's not exposition. That's schema collapse. That's the moment the mind realizes the map it's been using doesn't match the territory anymore. And when that happens, the system begins to flood. Military forces escalate, guns fired, sirens scream, Murray jokes. Explosions ripple. Even 11 raises her hand again. Not calmly, not centered, but reactively. Power answering power, trauma meeting trauma. This is not integration, this is collision. Even Vecna's voice reflects it. Everything you feared is here. The end has already begun. That's not truth. It's the trauma narrative at full volume. Absolutes. Vanillity. Catastrophic. This is how the seizure takes control when uncertainty gets too big. And then come the images designed to hit your nervous system directly. A demogorgon being shocked into submission. A body falling through space. Someone possibly lost. It doesn't matter who it is. It matters is that feeling of shock. Shock Jock exists to push the system past its limit. To show us, viscerally, that escalation won't lead to resolution. That fighting harder only widens the fracture. That the nervous system can't win a war against itself. This chapter isn't here to answer questions. It's here to exhaust the old approach. Because only when the fight burns out, only when the noise peaks, only when the body realizes it can't muscle its way through it anymore, does the story finally turn inward. Shock Jock is the last scream before the silence. And silence is where the real work begins. Alright, now we land at chapter 6. Escape from Camazotz. So if Chapter 5 was shock to the system, then Chapter 6 is something quieter and far more dangerous. Because Camazotz is not a battlefield. It's a comfortable prison. In A Wrinkle in Time, Camazotz is the planet where everything is orderly, synchronized, predictable, where individuality disappears not through violence, but through comfort and certainty. Everyone moves in a rhythm. No one questions. No one feels. That's what this chapter represents. Camazotz is the place the psyche retreats to after trauma, when chaos has gone too far. A place that says, if I just stay still, nothing can hurt me. This chapter is anchored through Max and Holly, because they are not fighters here. They are navigators. What we see on screen will likely feel strange, dreamlike, and almost gentle. There'll be doors. There'll be corridors. Rooms that look familiar, but slightly wrong. Exit points feel close, but then they leap back. This is not an escape room. It's a maze of meanings. Every door Max and Holly pass through represents a different response to trauma. One door offers safety through forgetting. Another offers safety through obedience. Another offers safety through fantasy. Another offers safety through numbness. None of these are wrong, but that's the trap. Because Camazotz doesn't torture you. It soothes you into staying. Max understands this. That's why she doesn't tell Holly to run. She tells Holly the truth. This place feels safe, but it isn't freedom. It's a prison. Max isn't guessing. She's been here before. She knows what it's like to be frozen inside a moment, not dead, not alive, suspended in a world that keeps looping because the pain was never fully felt. This is why Vecna cannot enter Max's sanctuary, not because it's powerful, but because it's seen. Trauma can invade chaos. It can't dominate fear. But it cannot survive a witnessed truth. And this is where the key decision of chapter 6 happens. Max doesn't try to escape Camazotz with Holly. She does something far more precise. She asks Holly to go back. Go back to the house. She's reluctant at first. But then she says, you have to go back to the place where Vecna believes control still exists. Not because it's safe, but because it keeps the illusion intact. This is subtle, but it's critical. In psychological terms, this is called strategic compliance. When the self allows a protector or illusion to continue temporarily, so the deeper system can reorganize. Holly agrees because she trusts Max. And trust is what happens when it opens that third door. In A Wrinkle in Time, there are always three choices. Give up, submit, escape. So most people think escape means running, but escape actually means integration. Max chooses door 3, but not yet. she stays behind. Why? Because she's not trapped. She's anchoring. Because someone has to hold the map from inside the maze. So chapter 6 ends without spectacle. There's no explosions. There's no victories. No monsters are defeated yet. Just a quiet, unsettling realization. Camazotz is real. It feels good. And if you're not careful, you'll never want to leave. Which brings us to the next chapter. Because once you see the maze for what it is, the only way out is to cross, yes, you guessed it, the bridge. So yes, chapter 7, the bridge. Chapter 6 was all about the maze. Then chapter 7 is about the crossing. And a bridge is never neutral. A bridge exists only because two worlds are already touching. This is the chapter where Stranger Things stops pretending the inner world and outer world are separate stories. They converge. In mythology, the bridge always appears at the same moment. When the old way no longer works and the new way is not yet clear. Psychologically, this is the moment where the system can no longer split reality into inside and outside. Everything leaves. This is why this chapter will feel unstable. Time will begin to bend. Perspective fractures. Characters appear in places they shouldn't logically be. Not because the rules are breaking, but because the rules were never what we thought they were. In the trailers, we see this everywhere. Characters looking up at something vast and moving. A red pulsing presence. Not quite a monster, but not quite a machine. People frozen between action and surrender. Someone falling. Someone's reaching. Someone saying, everything we thought we knew was wrong. That's bridge language. Because a bridge is not a place you fight from. It's a place you choose from. This chapter belongs to Will. Not as a victim, not as a receiver, but as a threshold. All season, Will has been described as an antenna, a signal, a conduit. But chapter 7 reframes that. Will isn't just receiving the upside down. He's standing between worlds. This is why the imagery around him changes. We see him standing. We see him overwhelmed. We hear him saying, "We failed. Run." That line isn't despair. It's clarity. It's the moment a protector realizes brute force won't solve this anymore. Because Will will now carry what Vecna carries. But without Vecna's fracture. Vecna wants to rule from the bridge. Will wants to hold it. That difference matters. And this is where 11 comes back into focus. In earlier seasons, 11 crossed bridges by force. She tore holes. She pushed through walls. She overpowered. In chapter 7, posture changes. In the trailers, we don't see her screaming. We see her standing. We see her calm. Hand raised, not in panic, but in alignment. That self at the bridge. Not choosing sides. Not collapsing the worlds, but allowing them to meet without domination. This is also why we see 8 again. Because illusion is not the enemy at the bridge. Illusion is the buffer. Fantasy softens the crossing so the system doesn't shatter. 8 doesn't rewrite reality here. She stabilizes perception long enough for the truth to land. Meanwhile, the outer world looks like it's falling apart. There's sirens. There's weapons. There's fridge doors closing. There's dishes rattling. Panic. People trying to solve the problem with force. That's what systems do when they don't understand what's happening. They escalate. But escalation doesn't work at a bridge. It only makes you fall. And this is where one of the hardest moments likely lands. Someone doesn't make it across the way we expect. Not because they failed, but because sacrifice at a bridge is symbolic, not literal. It's the death of a role, the end of a protector identity. The moment someone stops being the shield, the tough one, the fixer, or the distraction. That's why the trailer pairs characters that separates them. It's not about who dies here. It's about who lets go of the job they've been clinging to. By the end of chapter 7, something irreversible happens. Not a victory. A commitment. The bridge is crossed. However, not everyone arrives the same way. Not everyone arrives unchanged. But once crossed, there's no going back to denial. The inner world and outer world are now one system, which is why the final chapter has only one more possible name. The right side up. Because after the bridge, there is no upside down anymore. There is only integration. And that's where the story has been going the entire time. Alright, now we get to the finale. So I might as well take a kick at the can at this prediction. So chapter 8, the right side up. Every story that survives long enough eventually has to answer one question. What happens after the war? Not the explosions, not the sacrifice, not even the final blow. What happens when the nervous system stops bracing? That's what the right side up is really about. Because if chapter 7 was the crossing, then chapter 8 is the arrival. And the arrival is always quieter than most people expect. By the time we reach the final chapter, the rules of Stranger Things have already dissolved. There's no longer a clean line between Hawkins and the Upside Down. No clear boundary between inner and outer. No single villain driving the story forward. That's not a flaw. That's integration. In psychology, when a system finally reorganizes, it doesn't explode. It exhales. The chaos doesn't end because it's defeated. It ends because it's no longer needed. That's why this chapter won't feel like a traditional finale. It won't be about winning. It will be about remembering. We've been trained by movies to expect the final episode to go bigger. Louder battles, higher stakes, more destruction. And sometimes we get let down. But Stranger Things has always been smarter than that. The show understands something most stories miss. You don't end trauma by overpowering it. You end it by bringing every part back into the same room. So here's what the right side up actually represents. It's the moment when the psyche stops splitting reality into safe and unsafe, inside, outside, monster and human. Those distinctions collapse, not into chaos, but into wholeness. This is why the final imagery keeps returning to familiar places. Homes, basements, round tables, quiet rooms, the places where the story began. Because psychologically, healing always circles back to the origin. Not to relieve it, not to relive it, but to re-enter it with presence. In this chapter, 11 is no longer the weapon. She's no longer the one holding everything together by force. She doesn't need to raise her hand anymore. She's standing, centered. Self doesn't push reality into place. It always allows reality to settle. Will, too, is different now. If earlier seasons showed him as one of those characters that sense danger, and Chapter 7 showed him as the one who held the bridge, then Chapter 8 shows him as something else entirely. A witness. He doesn't dominate the Upside Down. He doesn't become Vecna. He doesn't replace the shadow. He integrates it. That's why his power changes. It's no longer invasive, no longer painful, no longer consuming. It's contextual. He can feel what's happening without being swallowed by it. That's what happens when a nervous system learns the difference between information and identity. And then there's Max. Max's role completes here. She was never meant to be rescued like a hostage. She was never meant to win a fight. She was the exile, the frozen piece. And exiles don't come back through force. They come back through safety. Through time, through presence, through someone staying. That's why music mattered. That's why memory mattered. That's why someone not giving up mattered. In the final chapter, Max doesn't return as a symbol of triumph. She returns as proof. Proof that freeze is not death. Proof that numbness is not failure. Proof that even when someone disappears inward, they are still reachable. And then there's Vecna. Or Henry. Or Mr. Whatsit. Or One. However they choose to name him in the end. This story does not end with his dramatic destruction. Because psychologically, that would be dishonest. Trauma doesn't disappear. It loses authority. The shadow doesn't die. It returns to proportion. In the right side up, Vecna's power collapses, not because he's beaten, but because the system no longer organizes itself around him. No fear feeding him. No exile trapped anymore. No fantasy masking reality. No protector escalating endlessly. Without fragmentation, there is nothing left for him to rule. That's the quiet truth at the heart of this ending. The monster was never the source. It was the symptom. As the chapter unfolds, the world doesn't reset. There's no magical undoing. No erasing of all that pain and suffering. No pretending nothing happened. That's very important. The right side up isn't about returning to innocence. It's about returning to presence. The kids are older. The town is marked. The losses, they're very real. But the system is coherent again. Which is why the final images almost certainly mirror the beginning. A table. A game. A shared moment. Not because time looped, but because the cycle finally completed. This is the meaning of the right side up. Not a universe without darkness, but a world where darkness is no longer in charge. Where fear doesn't write the rules. Where control isn't mistaken for safety. Where power doesn't come from domination. It comes from integration. So the ending won't shout. It will land. And if this plane lands properly, it will feel strangely familiar. Not because you've seen it before, but because some part of you remembers it. That part that existed before you learned to armor up, before the world taught you to split yourself, before survival became your primary identity. That's the place the story ends. Not with spectacle, but with a system that can finally rest. It's the same world. It's the same people. It's the same life. But a different presence is running it. That's the right side up. And I don't think this ending is meant to surprise us. I think it's meant to feel familiar to the body. Because Stranger Things didn't just go back to the 1980s for nostalgia. It went back to a time before we lived inside screens, before constant noise, before algorithms telling us who we were supposed to be. You played outside. You rode bikes until the streetlights came on. You knocked on doors. You wandered. And if you wanted a friend, you just asked. I remembered that. I remember standing at the end of a dead-end street, and a kid didn't know I was there, but came down the hill and stopped and looked at me and said, "Hi, my name's Chad. Do you want to be my friend?" And that was it. We were friends. No profiles, no performance, no fear of being seen. And when one of my sons watched that scene with Will on the swing, right before everything changed, he asked me, "Was it really like that back then?" And I said, "Yeah, exactly like that." That's what the story keeps circling back to. Not the monster, not the powers. Those things are awesome to watch, and it makes it exciting on the surface. And I love those parts too. But it's the moment before we drifted away from ourselves, before the world got louder than our instincts, before we forgot how simple connection used to be. The ending doesn't tell us how to fix the world. It just reminds us of the center we came from. And maybe that's enough, because the world doesn't need to go backward. We just need to remember what we were like before we forgot who we were. And that's where Stranger Things will land this plane very smoothly onto the new runway. And then hopefully we can take the costume off, one mask at a time. Thanks again for coming here and enjoying the story behind Stranger Things.